It's lovely to be here. Which brings me on to my subject of innovation, and I'm going to approach it, if I may, in a slightly abstract way. I'm not going to go straight for innovation. What I'm really interested in discussing with you is the way in which you can create an environment, so creating the right conditions for innovation, okay? And so what we've done is we've invested in leadership development. Okay. We've invested in creating a coaching culture within our organization, and by that, I mean a culture which values asking questions, listening, and empowering people. So the first thing is leadership. So how have we done that? Well, we've created 2 programs. One of them is Rising Stars. It's a 2-year program for emerging leaders. So we have 2 graduates, and we have 10 internal candidates from all over the business. So people don't know one another, and they're put together in a group. They have 6 workshops a year. They get an internal coach. They work on a real project within the organization, and they do a presentation at the end. One of them is an elevator pitch, and one of them is a presentation on their leadership journey. We've also, more recently, worked on leading lights for senior leaders. And it's been a big investment. It's 2 residential weeks separated out. The first one looks at kind of emotional intelligence and coaching skills. The second week looks at narrative and storytelling, and in all its forms. And in between, every member is twinned to an external executive coach. Okay? So those are the big investments we've put into leadership at our organization. I'm not interested in developing identical leaders. Okay? This isn't about putting people through a sausage machine so we have identical people at the end of it. I'm not interested in creating an ATG leader, whatever that may be. Actually, it's about a creative exploration. And fundamentally, I'm asking 2 questions of them, of participants on the program, which mirrors my journey as a coach as well, where I was asked, who am I? So if you're going to lead people, you've got to know who you are. You've got to know your strengths and weaknesses. And that takes time and reflection and some exploration. So that's an important question. And then from that, how am I going to lead? And theatre is an inspiration. It's certainly an inspiration to me. That's why I work in the industry. I made a conscious decision to work in it. So we should use that as a source of inspiration. So it plays a very important part of all of our programs. And that goes back to what Ben was saying yesterday about purpose as well. And fundamentally, at the heart of what we do in theatre is storytelling. Okay? So it's also encouraging leaders to work out what their story is, what their narrative is, where are they, and bearing in mind that narratives and stories on stage certainly have ups and they have downs. You know, there's light and shade, and like these photographs from shows, I think leaders can influence the mood. So we talked about toxic leadership earlier. Well, what would the lighting look on that stage? Okay? It's not going to be warm, it's not going to be friendly, is it? So we all have the ability to change the mood, okay? And we've used various models. One that I really love, and we have John Blakey come along and talk about his book, The Trusted Executive, which I would really recommend reading. There's a great model in there about how you kind of inspire trust. And it's based on 3 pillars and 9 habits. The 9 habits are pictured there. So it's things that we don't often talk about in leadership. So things like being kind, okay, being humble. So those are the kinds of things that we throw in there to kind of encourage our leaders to explore leadership in a very different way in a modern context, because we're in a trust crisis. There's enough examples of that around the world. So how do we get out of this? And this provides a great model that we've used. The other thing is, and that's been spoken about a lot over the last couple of days, is creating a circle of safety. So often these people come together and they've never met one another, but by creating a safe environment, we can allow people to share more of themselves, and we've certainly seen that. So I want to share a few stories as this is talking about theatre and storytelling, and I've gained permission from some people to share some stories from some of our programs. The first one is around a music task that we set. So one of my other passions is actually classical film music. I've always loved it since I was a child. In certain films, there's an idea of a leitmotif that you might be familiar with. It certainly goes right back to opera, certainly before film. But if you think about films like Star Wars, certain characters have their own theme. So I was interested in that, and I asked people to prepare, before they came along to the second residential week, to prepare some thoughts and choose a piece of music that represented their leadership style at its best. The only proviso was that it couldn't be a song. It had to have no lyrics. And I wanted them to think about, well, what kind of music would my theme sound like? You know, what kind of instruments would be used? And I'd invite you to have a think about that for yourselves. If you were to choose a piece of music, you know, would it be loud? Would it have trumpets playing? Or would it be lilting and soothing? I asked them to consider the rhythm of the music and what that said about them. But equally, not just what it said about them, but how it would impact on others. So how their leadership style affected others. And so it's about choosing a piece of music. So it was a beautiful day in April. We all sat outside with a portable speaker, and we sat around in a circle. And I played the pieces of music. I mean, first of all, we had to guess whose piece of music it was. And one piece of music played, and nobody guessed who it was. And finally, the person stood up, and it was a guy called James. So you've got to be prepared to be vulnerable. And being vulnerable, actually, you've got to be brave. You've got to be courageous. And crucially, this is about getting creative too. Now, would James have come to that realization without the music exercise? I don't know, maybe. But I think that creative exercise actually sparked something different for him, like we've experienced today with our drawings. So there's something about creativity and learning through play. So our approach to creating a coaching culture has been introducing it at a very early stage. So we have coaching skills courses for introductory level. So anyone who wants to be a manager can have access to learning some of these things early on. I wish I'd have learned coaching skills when I first became a manager, because I felt that I had to know all the answers, that my function was to have a bigger brain and tell people what to do. So this is really important. We also have an internal coaching program where we work with the Academy of Executive Coaching. They do a certificate program for us. And we teach leaders how to coach at rising star level and leading lights. We also provide senior leaders with external executive coaching, which is expensive, but it actually makes such a big difference to people's development. And that's great. And we all know that the benefits of a coaching culture are it increases motivation and all of those things. If I invest in 10 people and those 10 people are better leaders and influence the culture in their places of work positively, then that's worth it, okay? One of the participants, Erica Schwartz, who's a general manager at the Colonial Theatre in Boston, went back and took subject matter from Leading Lights and taught her team. So that's been a good return on investment, isn't it? People are using the stuff and using it wisely.